being responsible for the murders of Dixon and Mason Wrist on Saturday 27th of January 2014 at around 2300.
There is a particular kind of darkness that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with thunder or warning sirens. It does not wear a face you would recognize as dangerous. It comes in the form of an ordinary evening, a brick thrown through a window, a spreadsheet updated in a back office, a group of boys walking to buy pizza, a woman counting cash in a grocery shop that smells of cumin and cardamom. England, 2021. 2 crimes, 2 cities, 2 sets of people who believed with complete certainty that they would never be found. They were wrong about that, but by the time the truth surfaced, 2 boys were dead, £53 million had vanished into the grey economy, and the justice system was left to answer a question no one wanted to ask aloud. How long had we not been looking? The call came in while Detective Sergeant Rachel Morrow was finishing her 3rd coffee of the shift and pretending to read a report she had already memorized. 2 males down, Ilminster Avenue, stab wounds, multiple. She was in her car before the dispatcher finished the sentence. By the time she arrived, the street had already been transformed into something that looked nothing like the residential road it had been 20 minutes ago. Blue lights strobed against the brick terraces. Paramedics moved with the controlled urgency of people who already knew the outcome, but were not yet permitted to stop. A woman in a dressing gown stood at her garden gate, hands pressed to her mouth, eyes fixed on something on the pavement that Morrow did not let herself look at too long. Not yet. She suited up and crossed the cordon. The scene told her several things immediately. 2 victims, young, very young. One had collapsed near the center of the pavement, the other closer to a garden wall, as if he had tried to reach his front door. The proximity to that door was the detail that would stay with Morrow longest in the weeks that followed. He had nearly made it home. He had been steps away from safety, and it had meant nothing. How long? She asked the first officer on scene. Call came in at 11:42. Attack was over before that. Witnesses say it was fast. How fast? He looked at his notepad. CCTV still being pulled, but early estimates under a minute. Morrow crouched near the outer edge of the scene, careful of the markers the forensic team had already placed. She was not looking at the blood, though there was a great deal of it. She was looking at the street itself, the direction of approach, the position of the nearest lamp post, the camera mounted on the corner of a house 3 properties down, its small red light blinking steadily in the dark. You saw everything, she thought. Get me that footage, she said, tonight. Earlier that evening at a house in Hartcliffe, something small had happened. A brick, a single brick, thrown with enough force to shatter a ground floor window, had sailed through the glass and changed the direction of several lives simultaneously, though none of the people inside the house would have described it that way at the time. What they felt was simpler than that. Violation, anger, the particular electric humiliation of being targeted inside your own home. Cody Shai Wescott was 19 years old. He was not a complicated person in most of the ways that matter. He was loyal to his people, reactive to threat, and had grown up in an environment where the distance between feeling wronged and taking action was measured not in days but in minutes. The house in Hartcliffe was his family's. The broken window was his family's problem, and the solution, as far as he understood it, was straightforward. Phones came out almost before the glass had finished falling. The question being asked, rapidly, across multiple conversations, was not should we respond but who do we go for? No one had seen who threw the brick. The CCTV outside the property showed figures hooded, masked, moving quickly, but nothing that could identify a specific person. There was no name, no address, no confirmed connection to any individual. There was only the assumption. And in Hartcliffe that night, the assumption was enough. Weapons were already in the house. This was not unusual. Knives and machetes had been accessible for long enough that reaching for them required no particular decision, only the motion. Anthony Snook, older than the others, pulled his car around. Cody climbed in. Riley Toiver followed. Two others, teenagers, their names protected by law, took the remaining seats. The car moved out into the Bristol night, and the people inside it were looking for someone to punish for something they could not prove. The CCTV footage lasted 33 seconds. Morrow had watched it so many times that she had stopped seeing it as violence and started seeing it as geometry, the arc of a raised arm, the angle of approach, the vector of retreat. This was the only way to do the job without it hollowing you out. But in court, watching the jury see it for the first time, she remembered what it actually was. 33 seconds, two boys walking to buy food, the car stopping, the doors opening, the group moving across the pavement with weapons already drawn. Max Dixon had been 16 years old. Mason Wrist had been 16 years old. They had grown up together. Same nursery, same primary school, same secondary school. They had been gaming at Mason's house that evening, and they had walked outside to get pizza, the way 16-year-old boys do, in the ordinary way of ordinary evenings. Mason's front door had been less than 20 meters away when the car stopped. The prosecution barrister let the footage run twice before speaking. The defendants, she said quietly, had no idea who these boys were. They had no evidence connecting them to the brick attack. They were chosen because they were present, because they were there. That was the only reason. Morrow watched the jury. She had become skilled at reading them without appearing to, the small shifts in expression, the moments when someone looked away from the screen. No one looked away. The cover-up when Morrow's team pieced it together had been almost domestic in its practicality. A fire in the back garden, clothing burned, weapons cleaned and moved, phones destroyed or disposed of before dawn. Bailey Wescott had arranged taxis, kept people moving, kept them out of areas where police were active. Jamie Ogborn had offered a flat, a temporary address, a place to disappear into. Burner phones had been handed out, instructions given. Don't say where you were, don't say who was there. It had been, Morrow reflected, a reasonably competent attempt at erasure. What it had not accounted for was the camera mounted 3 properties down from the attack site, or the phone mast data that placed each device in Hartcliffe, and then on Ilminster Avenue within the same 40-minute window, or the forensic officer who found a partial print on one of the recovered blades that had not been cleaned quite carefully enough. It had not accounted for the fact that guilt, distributed across multiple people, always finds at least one crack to leak through. At Bristol Crown Court, 5 defendants were convicted of murder. Cody Shai Wescott, Riley Toiver, Anthony Snook, and 2 teenagers whose names the court would not release. The judge spoke for a long time during sentencing. Morrow sat in the gallery and listened to words she had heard before in other courtrooms, deliberate, brutal, irreversible, but which did not become less true for their repetition. Anthony Snook received life with a minimum of 38 years. Cody Shai Wescott received life with a minimum of 23 years, to be held initially in a secure children's facility. Outside the court, the families of Max Dixon and Mason Wrist stood in the gray Bristol daylight and said the things that families say at these moments, that their boys had done nothing wrong, that they had simply gone out for food, that they would never stop being missed. Morrow walked to her car and sat in it for several minutes without starting the engine. 33 seconds. She started the engine and drove. 200 miles north and east of Bristol, in a part of London where the streets are busy enough that no one pays particular attention to any single shop, a woman named Galina Nicolova was, at various points between 2016 and 2021, running what investigators would eventually describe as the largest benefit fraud operation ever prosecuted in England and Wales. She did not look like what people imagine when they imagine large-scale organized crime. She was methodical. She was patient. She understood bureaucracy the way a locksmith understands locks, not with admiration, but with precise, technical knowledge of exactly where the weaknesses were. The operation ran out of 3 locations in London. The primary base was in Wood Green, chosen for its ordinariness, busy streets, mixed foot traffic, a neighborhood where people minded their own business because everyone was too occupied with their own business to mind anyone else's. The shops in the surrounding area had opening hours, deliveries, staff who arrived in the morning and left in the evening, all the rhythms of legitimate commerce. Antonia Foods fit perfectly into that landscape. From the outside, it was a grocery shop. Inside, behind the shelves and the refrigerators and the faint smell of produce and packaging, it was something else entirely. Computers, printers, stacks of paper organized with a precision that would have impressed any office manager. And running through it all, the invisible architecture of 6,000 fraudulent universal credit claims. Priya Nair had worked in benefit fraud investigation for 11 years, and in that time she had developed what her colleagues called her pattern sense, a capacity to feel wrongness in data before she could articulate what specifically was wrong. The Wood Green cluster gave her that feeling the first time she looked at it. Claims were not unusual. The volume of universal credit applications processed through the DWP every month was staggering, and even a significant spike in a particular area could have innocent explanations: a local employer closing, a housing change, seasonal fluctuation. Nair had learned not to jump at shadows. But this was not a shadow. This was 100 claims originating from the same small geographic pocket of North London, many of them sharing overlapping tenancy addresses, employer names, and payroll reference numbers that, when she began checking, led either nowhere or to businesses that could not confirm any knowledge of the named employees. She pulled more data. The pattern held, it deepened. She opened a fresh investigation file and wrote 2 words at the top: organized fraud. The system Nicolova had built was elegant in the way that reliable machinery is elegant, not beautiful, exactly, but efficient. Each fraudulent claim was supported by a complete bundle of forged documents, fake tenancy agreements establishing UK addresses, counterfeit pay slips designed to show modest income rather than unemployment, because claiming maximum entitlement attracted scrutiny, and scrutiny was the one thing the operation could not afford. GP letters, landlord references, employment histories, education documents, each one produced in response to a specific question the DWP had asked, rather than by default, which meant the group was not guessing at what the system required. They knew what it required, and they built accordingly. When photographs were demanded as proof of residence, the group adapted. Images appeared showing claimants standing outside properties, front doors open, a visual confirmation of habitation. These images had been created in Photoshop, real faces placed against stock backgrounds of doorways, assembled with enough competence to pass initial review. When claims were rejected, they were not abandoned. Guns Ali, whom the judge would later describe as having committed fraud on an industrial scale, oversaw the resubmission process with the patience of someone who understood that bureaucratic systems, however large, have finite attention spans. A rejected claim was modified, a detail changed, a supporting letter adjusted, then resubmitted, then rejected again if necessary, then resubmitted again. The cycle continued until approval came. And approval eventually almost always came. The breakthrough, when it came, did not come from London. It came from a city in Bulgaria called Sliven, where local police had been tracking financial flows and identity movements connected to a network operating partially in the UK. The intelligence they passed to British authorities was specific enough to be immediately useful. Names, account numbers, and the confirmation that real Bulgarian nationals living outside England had been recruited to provide their identities in exchange for a percentage of whatever the claims generated. Nair read the report 3 times. She had understood, intellectually, the scale of what she was looking at. £53 million was a number she had processed as data columns in a spreadsheet, totals at the bottom of pages. The Bulgarian intelligence made it human in a way the numbers had not. Real people had handed over their identities. Some had done it knowingly for money. Some had done it under circumstances the report described carefully and without embellishment. In every case, once the identity entered the system, it ceased to belong to the person who had provided it. Control passed fully to the group, and the named claimant became a fiction, a paper life assembled from forged documents and stock photographs of doorways. The joint investigation was already underway. DWP, Crown Prosecution Service. Metropolitan Police, when Guns Ali was arrested and subsequently released under investigation. Within days, he had left the country. He went to Bulgaria. Nair added his name to a separate file and began the paperwork for extradition proceedings. The property searches produced what prosecutors would later call an evidential trail that was, in some respects, almost too straightforward. Galina Nicolova's home contained cash stored in shopping bags, in suitcases, and concealed inside furniture. Alongside the cash were designer watches, branded jackets, luxury accessories. The accumulated physical evidence of what £53 million looked like when you converted portions of it into objects. On a seized mobile phone, investigators found a video. In the video, banknotes, 20-pound notes, were thrown into the air above a flat floor, the camera tracking them as they scattered and fell. It was not in the strictest sense incriminating evidence of a specific transaction, but it was something else, an attitude, a statement made in private and therefore honest about how the people in that room regarded the money they had taken from the public purse. The WhatsApp group messages were similarly illuminating. Members of the network communicated openly about the DWP's processes, its weaknesses, its response times. In several exchanges, they mocked the naivety of the department, the ease with which false documentation had been accepted, the slowness of verification processes, the predictability of the system's blind spots. 913 digital devices were seized across the searches: mobile phones, laptops, tablets, external drives containing records so comprehensive that the task of processing them took months. Stoyanov, closely associated with Nicolova and a key facilitator within the group, continued submitting fraudulent claims after his arrest. Not for days, for weeks. Investigators documented each submission, added it to the file, and said nothing. The additional evidence, when presented in court, closed whatever remaining argument his defense team had hoped to make. Patricia Panova had been 19 years old when she was recruited. She had received daily payments. She had accumulated significant sums. She had been, by the time of arrest, a functioning part of the machine, not its architect, but not its innocent either. Svetka Todorova had attempted to leave the UK following her arrest. She did not succeed. The sentencing at Wood Green Crown Court was conducted by Judge David Arenberg KC, who did not appear to be a man given to rhetorical flourish, but who found, in this case, that plain language was the most devastating option available to him. This was not opportunistic offending. It was sustained. It was organized. It treated the welfare system, built to support the most vulnerable members of society, as a mechanism for personal enrichment, and it did so with planning, discipline, and persistence over more than 4 years. The deportation warnings followed. For those without lawful immigration status in the UK, custodial sentences would be followed by immigration proceedings. Financial investigators told the court that of the nearly £54 million stolen, approximately $2 million could realistically be recovered. The remainder had been withdrawn in cash, spent on luxury goods, transferred through accounts in multiple jurisdictions, or moved beyond the practical reach of confiscation proceedings. Galina Nicolova, 8 years imprisonment. Guns Ali, extradited from Bulgaria in February 2023, 7 years. Stoyanov, 4 years. Patricia Panova, 3 years and 2 months. Svetka Todorova, 3 years, released on license due to time served. Nair sat in the public gallery and wrote nothing in her notepad. There was nothing to write. The numbers were already in the record. I spent 6 months trying to understand what connected these two cases, and I kept arriving at the same answer, which felt too simple to be correct, and which I have since decided is exactly correct. Both of them were built on the assumption that no one was paying close enough attention. The group in Hartcliffe assumed that the darkness and the masks and the speed of the attack, 33 seconds, would be enough, that the cameras would miss something, or the witnesses would see too little, or the phones would be destroyed in time, or the people they had trusted to protect them would hold. None of those assumptions survived contact with the investigation. In Wood Green, the assumption was more sophisticated and for longer more justified. A grocery shop in a busy street, ordinary hours, staff coming and going, 6,000 claims spread across 5 years, each one individually unremarkable, designed to be processed and forgotten and replaced by the next. The assumption was that scale itself was a form of camouflage, that the system was too large to notice the pattern running through it. It was a reasonable assumption. It was for years correct. And then an analyst in the DWP's fraud team looked at a cluster of applications from Wood Green and felt something was wrong before she could say what it was, and the assumption stopped being correct. I think about Max Dixon and Mason Wrist sometimes. Not constantly. I have learned in this job that constant thinking is not the same as useful thinking. But sometimes, 2 boys who went out for pizza on an ordinary evening and encountered, in 33 seconds, the consequences of a decision made by people who assumed that assumption was the same as knowledge. And I think about the 53 million, not as a number, but as the accumulated weight of thousands of small decisions made by people who looked at a system designed to help the vulnerable and decided it was theirs to take. Both crimes ended in courtrooms. Both produced convictions. Both produced sentences that the families affected described with quiet precision as insufficient, and which were, legally, what the evidence and the law permitted. What they did not produce, and what no verdict ever produces, is restoration. Max Dixon's family cannot be restored. Mason Wrist's family cannot be restored. The £53 million, the $2 million recovered notwithstanding, is not coming back. What justice produces at its best is the record. This happened, these people did this. This was the consequence. The record exists. Whether we do enough with it is a different question, and one I do not have the authority to answer. I am only the person who wrote it down.